You'd think a simple life would mean no secrets, no drama, just peace. That's what I believed anyway. For a guy like me, living quietly in a small California town with the love of my life, that was the dream. But even simple lives have shadows, and mine was no exception. I wasn't chasing fame or fortune. I was just a regular guy, building a future brick by brick, married to the woman I thought I'd grow old with. It felt solid, unshakable, until the day it all unraveled. Maggie and I had been married for 20 years. 2 whole decades of ups and downs, sure, but mostly it was good, damn good. She was my rock, a kind-hearted woman who could light up a room without even trying. I met her when I was 25, and even then, I knew she was something special. She wasn't one of those people who played games. What you saw with Maggie was what you got. Honest, hard-working, funny in a quiet, unexpected way. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She was just Maggie, and that was enough. Our house wasn't much by most standards, a small 2-bedroom on the outskirts of town, but we'd made it ours. Every corner of it held a memory. The uneven kitchen floor where Maggie spilled a pot of spaghetti during our first year of marriage. The porch swing I built one summer, even though I'm terrible with tools. She laughed so hard when it collapsed under us the first time we sat on it. I worked construction most of my life while Maggie cleaned houses for a living. Not glamorous. Work, but honest. She always took pride in it, saying there was something satisfying about turning a mess into something beautiful. I liked that about her. She had a way of finding joy in the small things. Lately, though, there'd been a shift. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, like the faint scent of smoke before a fire catches. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it. Maggie had started working longer hours. She'd always been dedicated, but now she was coming home later and later, sometimes well past dinner. The clients are more demanding these days, she'd explain with an apologetic smile. People want their houses spotless, and they're willing to pay extra for it. At first, I didn't think much of it. Times were tough for everyone, and we could use the money. But then I noticed other things. Little things that didn't sit right. She'd started wearing perfume to work, something she never used to do. And her phone? It was always on silent, tucked away in her bag. Am I being paranoid? I asked myself one night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Maggie's soft breathing filled the room. She looked so peaceful, so normal, and I felt like an idiot for even having the thought. But the feeling lingered. One afternoon, I stopped by her work to surprise her. It wasn't something I usually did, I'm not the clingy type, but I figured it'd be nice to grab lunch together. When I got there, though, one of her co-workers said she wasn't around. She left early today, the woman said, her tone casual, like it wasn't a big deal. That night I asked Maggie about it. She didn't even blink. "Oh, I must have been running errands," she said. "Sorry, hun. Did you need something?" I told myself to let it go. I trusted her. Of course, I did. But that little seed of doubt had already been planted, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. One morning, a few weeks later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the local newspaper. It was a ritual of mine. Coffee in one hand, paper in the other. There wasn't usually much to read, just the usual small-town stuff. Bake sales, council meetings, the occasional crime report. But that day something caught my eye. The headline read, "Scandal Rocks Local Cleaning Company." I froze. The article talked about an ongoing investigation into an employee who'd been caught in an inappropriate relationship with a high-profile client. There weren't any names, but the details were eerily familiar. The description of the employee, her age, her role, even the neighborhood she worked in, it all lined up. I read the words over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. Could it be Maggie? No, it couldn't. It had to be someone else. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit. The late nights, the perfume, the strange excuses. My hands trembled as I set the paper down. I wanted to ask her about it right then and there, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or denial. I didn't want it to be true. God, I needed it not to be true. So I sat there staring at the headline, the words blurring together as my mind raced. Was this just a coincidence? Or was it the truth, staring me in the face? I couldn't get that article out of my head. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I spent the rest of the morning pacing, the house pretending to clean, though nothing really needed it. My mind kept going back to the same questions. Could it really be Maggie me that evening? I'd convinced myself that I was overthinking things. Maggie walked in, her face a little flushed from the cold January air, her bag slung over one shoulder. "Hey, hun," she said, smiling as she set her keys on the counter. "What's for dinner?" I tried to act normal. "Thought I'd throw some burgers on the grill," I said, keeping my tone light. She nodded, and for a second, everything felt like it always did. Easy, comfortable, like the last 20 years had been. But then I caught a whiff of her perfume. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to catch my attention. Maggie wasn't a big fan of fancy scents. She'd always joked that soap and water were all she needed, yet here she was, smelling like she'd just walked out of a department store. I couldn't help myself. "You've been wearing that a lot lately," I said, my voice as casual as I could manage. She paused, glancing at me over her shoulder as she unpacked her bag. "What?" "The perfume," I said. "It's nice. Just not like you." Maggie smiled, a little too quickly, like she'd been rehearsing. "Oh, one of the clients gave it to me. Said it was a thank you for going the extra mile," she laughed. "I figured I might as well use it. Wouldn't want it to go to waste." I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Maggie wasn't the type to take gifts from clients. She'd always prided herself on being professional, keeping her distance. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself staring at her phone. It was sitting on the nightstand, face down, silent as ever. I knew I shouldn't touch it. Maggie and I had never been the kind of couple to snoop through each other's stuff. We trusted each other. At least we used to. But that seed of doubt had taken root, and before I knew it, I was reaching for the phone. The screen lit up when I picked it up, showing a message notification. "Had a great time today. Can't wait for next week." My heart stopped. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, just an unfamiliar string of digits. My hand shook as I stared at the message, debating what to do. Should I open it? Confront her? Pretend I hadn't seen it? I ended up putting the phone back exactly where I found it. I told myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe it was one of her coworkers. Maybe it was nothing. But the next few days only made things worse. Maggie started coming home even later than usual, her excuses growing thinner by the day. "Mrs. Peterson wanted me to do the windows," she'd say, or "I had to wait for the floor polish to dry." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But then one afternoon, I decided to test her. I left work early and drove past one of the neighborhoods where she cleaned. It was a quiet area, full of big houses with perfectly manicured lawns. Maggie had told me she'd be working there all afternoon, cleaning for some new client. Her car wasn't there. I drove around for a while, checking the nearby streets, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. But no matter how many times I circled the neighborhood, there was no sign of her. By the time I got home, I was fuming. I sat at the kitchen table waiting for her, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. When she finally walked through the door, I could barely look at her. "How was work?" I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. "Same as always," she said. "Long day. You?" "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Nothing out of the ordinary." She kissed me on the cheek and headed for the shower, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message on her phone. "Had a great time today. Can't wait for next week." And then there was the article, the missing car, the perfume. It was all adding up, piece by piece, like some cruel puzzle. I thought about confronting her right then and there, but I wasn't ready. I needed proof, something solid that she couldn't talk her way out of. So, I decided to wait, to watch, to see if my suspicions were real or if I was just losing my mind. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maggie acted like nothing had changed, but for me, everything felt different. I started paying closer attention to the little things, the way she answered questions, the way she moved around the house, even the tone of her voice. Was she avoiding me? Or was I just seeing ghosts? The problem with suspicion is that it feeds on itself. Once you start questioning everything, you can't stop. Every look, every word, every silence becomes a potential clue. I hated feeling like this, paranoid, insecure, like I was looking for reasons to doubt her. But the truth was, I couldn't let it go. It had been a week since I'd read that article in the newspaper, and I still hadn't said anything about it. It sat on the counter where I'd left it, folded neatly, the headline staring back at me every time I walked by. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her about it either. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I pulled the paper out and read the article again. Scandal rocks local cleaning company. The story was vague, written in that careful way that reporters use when they don't want to get sued. It didn't name the employee or the client, but it hinted at enough details to make it clear that someone in Maggie's company was involved. The reporter described the employee as a trusted veteran who had been with the company for years and was well-liked by clients. That could have been anyone. But then there was the part about the client, a wealthy local businessman who lived in a gated community on the north side of town. That narrowed it down. Maggie had mentioned working in that area before. She'd even told me about some of the clients, doctors, lawyers, real estate developers. "It's crazy how much money these people have," she'd said once. "You should see some of these houses. They've got rooms bigger than our whole place." I thought back to her stories, trying to remember if she'd ever mentioned anything about the guy in the article, a real estate developer, mid-40s, divorced. The details were too specific to ignore. I decided to do something I'd never done before. The next morning, after Maggie left for work, I grabbed her laptop. It wasn't unusual for her to leave it at home. She mostly used it to check emails or watch YouTube videos. My heart was pounding as I opened it, my hands trembling as I typed in her password. We didn't keep secrets, or at least I thought we didn't, so I knew her password. It worked on the first try. Her email inbox popped up, rows of subject lines stretching across the screen. Most of them were harmless. Work assignments, newsletters, confirmations from online shopping. But as I scrolled, something caught my eye. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Follow-up from last week." I clicked on it. The email was short, barely a few sentences. "Thanks again for all your help. I really appreciate you going above and beyond. Let's do the same time next week. My place, if that works for you. Let me know." There was no name, just a signature at the bottom. C. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. C. Who the hell was C? The email didn't explicitly say anything inappropriate, but there was something about it that felt wrong. I checked the sender's email address. It was a private domain, not the kind of thing most people used for casual communication. Whoever this C was, they weren't just another client. My head was spinning. Was this the same person from the article? Was this the guy Maggie had been spending all those extra hours with? I closed the laptop and sat there, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me was terrified of what I might hear. What? If she denied it? What if she lied to my face? Or worse, what if she told the truth? That evening, I tried to act normal. I cooked dinner, we talked about our days, and I pretended like everything was fine. But the whole time, my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about that email, about the article, about the phone message I'd seen. After dinner, Maggie went to take a shower and I found myself staring at her phone again. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't help it. I picked it up, unlocked it, and opened her messages. The text from that unknown number was still there. "Had a great time today. Can't wait for next week." I clicked on the thread, half expecting to find more messages, but there was nothing else. Just that one, sitting there like a ticking bomb. By the time Maggie came back into the room, I'd put the phone down and was pretending to watch TV. She sat next to me, her hair damp, her face glowing from the steam of the shower. She looked so normal, so familiar, and it tore me apart inside. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at me. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She nodded and leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body felt like it was made of stone. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The article, the email, the text. It was all too much to ignore. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but when I woke up, the sun was streaming through the blinds, and Maggie's side of the bed was already cold. She must have gotten up early, probably for one of her longer shifts. Part of me felt relieved. I needed time to think, time to figure out what the hell I was going to do. The house felt too quiet after she left. I wandered around, restless, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My eyes kept drifting to the kitchen counter, where the newspaper still sat. That headline, those words, they felt like they were mocking me now. Scandal rocks local cleaning company. I couldn't shake the feeling that my whole life was unraveling, one thread at a time. 20 years of marriage, all those memories we'd built together, and now this? I felt like I didn't even know the woman I'd been sharing my life with. The anger hit me first. It came in waves, hot and blinding, making my hands clench into fists at my sides. How could she do this to me? To us? We weren't perfect, sure, but I thought we were solid. I thought we were happy. But underneath the anger, there was something else. Something darker and heavier. Doubt. What if I was wrong? What if I was blowing this all out of proportion? The email, the text, the article. They were suspicious, yes, but none of them were. Concrete proof. What if Maggie was telling the truth, and I was the one ruining things by not trusting her? By the time noon rolled around, I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, needing to clear my head. I ended up at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places that hadn't changed in decades. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, and for a moment, it felt comforting, like stepping into a time machine. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the parking lot while my mind raced. That's when I saw him. He was sitting a few booths over, talking on his phone. I recognized him immediately. Tall, clean-cut, expensive suit. He looked exactly like the photo in the article. See, I hadn't expected to see him here, of all places. What were the odds? I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears, trying to piece together what to do next. He was laughing at something, his voice low and smooth, like he didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't take it anymore. Before I even realized what I was doing, I stood up and walked over to his table. "Hey," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, startled, his phone still pressed to his ear. "Can I help you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I hesitated, suddenly unsure of myself. What was I even doing? Accusing a stranger in the middle of a diner? But the words came spilling out before I could stop them. "You work with Maggie, right? My wife?" The man frowned, glancing around like he wasn't sure if I was joking. "I don't know who that is," he said, his tone cool. "You're lying," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've seen your emails. I know about the cleaning company. Don't act like you don't know her." At that, something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned back in his seat, studying me. "Look, man," he said after a long pause. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm not involved in whatever this is." "You expect me to believe that?" I shot back. He sighed, setting his phone down on the table. "I'm a client, okay? That's it. I hired the company to clean my house. End of story. If your wife works there, that's not my problem." I stared at him, my chest heaving, trying to decide if I believed him. There was something about the way he said it, calm, almost bored, that made me hesitate. If he was lying, he was damn good at it. "Just stay the hell away from her," I said finally, my voice shaking. He didn't respond, just watched me with a blank expression as I turned and walked out of the diner. I spent the rest of the day driving around aimlessly trying to process what had just happened. Had I made a fool of myself? Or was he just a master manipulator covering his tracks? Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no closer to the truth than I had been that morning. When I got home, Maggie was already there sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked up when I walked in, her face lighting up in a smile. "Hey, there you are," she said. "Everything okay?" I froze. It was as if everything inside me clenched. How could she look so normal, so innocent, when my entire world was falling apart? Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just needed some fresh air. She nodded, going back to her laptop, and I stood there for a moment watching her. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. That night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her. No more dancing around it. No more second-guessing myself. I needed answers, no matter how much it hurt. As we lay in bed, the room silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan, I turned to her. "Maggie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hmm?" she murmured, her eyes closed. "There's something I need to ask you." Her eyes fluttered open and she turned to face me, her expression soft and curious. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, my chest tight. "Do you know a man named C?" Maggie's face froze, her soft expression hardening in an instant. It was as if I'd flipped a switch, and now all the warmth had drained out of her eyes. She stared at me, her lips slightly parted like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. "What?" she said, her voice quiet but sharp. I swallowed hard, feeling my heart slam against my ribcage. I said, "Do you know a man named C?" Her eyebrows knit together in confusion. Or maybe it was an act. I couldn't tell any more. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive now. "I've seen the emails, Maggie," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I've seen the texts. I know there's something going on. Just tell me the truth." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling as if she were struggling to catch her breath. Then she laughed, a short, humorless sound that made my skin crawl. "This is ridiculous," she said, sitting up and swinging, her legs over the side of the bed. "I don't know what you think you found, but you've got it all wrong." "Do I?" I shot back, sitting up to face her. "Because it sure looks like you've been spending a lot of time with someone you don't want me to know about. The late nights, the perfume, the lies about where you've been. And then there's the article. Maggie, the one about your company. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Stupid? No. But paranoid? Yes. God, I can't believe this. You're digging through my emails, accusing me of... I don't even know what. What do you think is happening, huh? You think I'm having an affair?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I thought about the message on her phone, the man at the diner, and my resolve hardened. "I don't know what to think anymore," I said, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "That's why I'm asking you. Just tell me the truth, Maggie. Please." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw something crack in her facade. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together, in her lap, and for a moment, I thought she was going to tell me everything. But when she looked back up at me, her eyes were cold again. "There's nothing to tell," she said. "You're making something out of nothing, and it's not fair. I work long hours because we need the money. I wear perfume because I like the way it smells. And that article? It's about someone else, not me. You're letting your imagination run wild, and it's not fair to either of us." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly it hurt. But there was something in her tone, something too rehearsed, too polished, that didn't sit right with me. "Then who's C?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face tightened again, and she shook her head. "I don't know, probably one of the clients. I don't keep track of their names." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the email, Maggie. Thanks for going above and beyond. Same time next week." "That's not how you talk to just a client." She stood up abruptly, her fists clenched at her sides. "You're unbelievable," she snapped. "Do you even hear yourself? You're accusing me of God knows what based on a stupid email and some article? That doesn't even mention me. I've done nothing but work my ass off to help support this family. And this is how you repay me?" Her words stung, but I couldn't back down now. I stood up too, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. "Then prove it," I said, my voice hard. If there's nothing going on, then show me. Let me see your phone, your emails. If you got nothing to hide, then prove it. Her eyes widened, and for a split second I saw panic flash across her face. It was gone just as quickly, replaced by anger, but I'd seen it, and that was all I needed. No, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. I'm not doing this. I'm not letting you invade my privacy just because you're having some midlife crisis and don't trust me anymore. It's not a midlife crisis, I shouted, the words bursting out of me before I could stop them. It's me trying to figure out why my wife of 20 years is acting like a stranger. You want to talk about privacy? How about honesty, Maggie? How about respect? Because right now I don't feel like I have either. She flinched, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to her. But then she shook her head, her jaw tightening. I can't do this, she said, her voice shaking. I'm not going to stand here and let you tear me apart over nothing. Believe what you want, but I know the truth, and deep down so do you. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hall. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left nothing but the shell. She hadn't denied it. Not really. She'd dodged, deflected, tried to turn it back on me. But she hadn't denied it. And that was the answer I needed. The next morning, Maggie was gone before I woke up. She left a note on the counter, something vague about picking up extra hours and having a lot on her plate. It was polite, distant, like a stranger had written it. The usual love. Maggie at the bottom was conspicuously absent. I stared at that note for a long time, the words blurring, as my mind replayed our argument from the night before. It was like the walls of my life were crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. The house felt suffocatingly quiet. I tried to distract myself, busying my hands with pointless tasks, cleaning the garage, mowing the lawn, even organizing the junk drawer. But no matter what I did, my thoughts kept circling back to the same place. The email, the article, the text. Her face when I said the name C. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there, staring me in the face. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and headed out, not sure where I was going, but knowing I couldn't sit still another minute. My truck rumbled down familiar streets, past landmarks that now felt tainted by doubt. The diner where we used to grab breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings, the park where we'd walk hand in hand, laughing about nothing. Every memory felt like a cruel joke now, mocking the life I thought we had. Before I realized it, I was pulling into the parking lot of Maggie's cleaning company. It was a modest building tucked away on the edge of town, with a simple sign out front. Sparkle and Shine Cleaning Services. I'd never been here before. Maggie had always kept work separate from home, and I never saw a reason to question it. But now, as I stared at the building, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't come back from. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. Then I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and walked inside. The receptionist looked up as I entered, a friendly smile spreading across her face. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a name tag that read, Tina. "Hi there," she said brightly. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for Maggie. Maggie Carter. Is she in?" Tina frowned, her smile faltering. "Maggie? She's not scheduled to be here today. Are you sure she didn't mention it?" "Yeah, I'm sure," I said, forcing a weak chuckle. She must have gotten her days mixed up. Tina nodded, her expression sympathetic. "It happens. If you want, I can leave her a message or let her know you stopped by." "No, that's okay," I said quickly. "Thanks anyway." I turned and walked out, my mind racing. If Maggie wasn't here, where the hell was she? I got back in my truck and sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My head was spinning, 1,000 thoughts colliding all at once. And then, like a beacon in the fog, I remembered the email. "Same time next week, my place, if that works for you." My pulse quickened as I pulled out my phone and opened the GPS. If this C was the client from the article, then there was only one gated community he could be living in. It was the fanciest neighborhood in town, a place where people like Maggie and me could never afford to live. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. The drive to the neighborhood felt like it took forever, even though it was only 20 minutes. My hands were slick on the wheel, my heart pounding as I pulled. Up to the gated entrance, a security guard stepped out of the booth, eyeing me suspiciously. "Can I help you?" he asked. I hesitated, my mind scrambling for an excuse. Yeah," I said. "I'm here to see Charles Whitman. I'm with Sparkle and Shine Cleaning Services." The guard raised an eyebrow. "Cleaning service? You don't look like—" "I'm just delivering supplies," I said quickly, cutting him off. The guard frowned, but eventually nodded, waving me through. The gate slid open, and I drove inside, my heart racing. The neighborhood was exactly what I'd expected. Immaculate lawns, sprawling mansions, expensive cars in every driveway. I felt out of place just being there, like an intruder in a world I didn't belong to. It didn't take long to find the house. It was the biggest one on the block, a modern monstrosity with floor-to-ceiling windows and a sleek minimalist design. A black sports car was parked in the driveway, its glossy surface gleaming in the late afternoon sun. I parked down the street and sat there for a moment trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't just walk up to the door and start banging on it, but I couldn't leave either. Then, as if on cue, the front door opened. Maggie stepped out. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her walk down the driveway, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her cleaning uniform immaculate. She looked so composed, so at ease, like she belonged there. A man followed her out, a tall, well-dressed man with slicked back hair and a confident stride. He was smiling, saying something I couldn't hear, and Maggie laughed in response. It felt like something had turned over inside me as I watched them. They stood by the car for a moment, talking and laughing like old friends, or something more. Then the man reached out, resting a hand on Maggie's shoulder. She didn't pull away. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The air seemed to leave my lungs, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. This was it, the proof I'd been searching for. And yet, as I sat there staring at them, I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. I felt hollow, empty. I waited until they went back inside before starting my truck and driving away. The world blurred around me as I sped down the road, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. What the hell was I supposed to do now? The drive home was a blur. I barely remembered the turns or the stoplights, my hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The image of Maggie standing there, laughing with him, his hand on her shoulder. It was seared into my brain. No matter how hard I tried to push it away, it kept coming back, each time slicing through me like a knife. When I got home, the house felt suffocating. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, every faint trace of her perfume seemed to mock me. This was our life, our home, our history, and yet it all felt like a lie. I paced the living room for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Should I confront her? Should I wait for her to come clean? Would she even bother? A part of me wanted to drive back to that house, pound on the door, and demand answers from both of them. But what good would that do? By the time the front door opened, it was already dark outside. I heard Maggie's keys jingling as she stepped inside, her voice carrying through the hallway. "Hey!" she called out, her tone light, like nothing was wrong. "You won't believe the day I've had. Mrs. Peterson's cat got into the cleaning supplies." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me standing in the living room, my arms crossed. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Where were you today, Maggie?" I finally asked, my voice low and steady. She blinked, caught off guard. "What? I told you I was working." "Working," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Is that what you call it now?" Her face flushed, and I saw her jaw tighten. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "I know, Maggie," I said, taking a step closer. "I know about him. I know about you and C." Her eyes widened, and for a split second I saw panic flicker across her face, but just as quickly she recovered, her expression hardening. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice rising. "You've been acting crazy lately, and now you're making wild accusations? What is wrong with you?" "Don't do that," I snapped. my voice louder now. Don't act like I'm imagining things. I saw you, Maggie. I saw you at his house. I saw the way you looked at him. Her face went pale, and she took a step back, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape. You followed me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to, I said, my tone sharp. Because you've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months. I don't even know how long anymore. She shook her head, her hands trembling. It's not what you think, she said, her voice cracking. Then what is it, Maggie? I demanded, my chest heaving. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. She hesitated, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. It wasn't supposed to happen, she finally said, her voice barely audible. It was stupid. A mistake. I ended it weeks ago. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. You ended it, I repeated, the words tasting like poison. So it did happen. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. It happened. But it didn't mean anything. I swear to you, it didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything, I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. Do you even hear yourself right now? You betrayed me, Maggie. You betrayed us. And now you're standing here telling me it didn't mean anything? How the hell am I supposed to believe that? I was lonely, she said, her voice raw and desperate. You've been so distant lately. Always working, always stressed. I felt like you didn't see me anymore, like I was just invisible. And then Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I'm not blaming you, she said quickly. I'm just trying to explain. It was a mistake, one I regret more than you'll ever know. I love you, and I never stopped loving you. Please, you have to believe me. I stared at her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, heartbreak, disbelief. How could she stand there and say she loved me after everything she'd done? After everything we'd built together? I don't know if I can, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Please, don't do this, she begged. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear. Just give me a chance. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her, to pretend like none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't shake the image of her with him, the sound of her laughter as they stood together. I need time, I said, my voice hollow. I can't do this right now. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of emptiness settle over me. Maggie's confession had given me the answers I thought I wanted, but they didn't bring me any peace. If anything, they only left me with more questions. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Or was this the end of everything we'd built together? I didn't know. And as I drove aimlessly through the dark streets, I realized I might not have the answer for a long time. I drove for hours that night, my truck cutting through the dark, empty streets like a lifeline in the void. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away. Away from Maggie, away from the house, away from the suffocating weight of what I'd just learned. Her words kept playing in my head over and over like a broken record. It didn't mean anything. How many times had she said that? As if those words could somehow erase what she'd done. As if they could undo the nights she spent with him, the lies she told me, the cracks she'd driven into the foundation of our life together. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of town, I felt like I was running on fumes. I booked a room with cash, not wanting to deal with the questions or the sympathy from anyone who might recognize me. The clerk handed me a key without so much as a glance, and I found myself alone in a dingy room that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper as the events of the past weeks crashed over me like a tidal wave. Maggie's late nights, the text, the email, The article, her confession, it was all so much, too much, and I didn't know how to process any of it. For the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. I sat there for a while watching. The droplets raced down the glass, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. The thought of going home made I felt a knot tighten inside me. I wasn't ready to face Maggie again, not yet. But I also couldn't hide out here forever. Eventually, I forced myself to get up and drive to the diner on the edge of town, the same one where I'd seen him. I wasn't sure why I went there. Maybe I was hoping for clarity, or maybe I just needed to be somewhere that felt familiar. The waitress greeted me with a tired smile, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking. I stared down at the steaming liquid, my hands wrapped around the mug as if it could anchor me. "You look like you've seen better days," she said, her voice kind but blunt. I forced a weak smile. "Yeah," I muttered. "Something like that." She didn't press me, just refilled my cup and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stayed there for hours, sipping coffee and staring out the window as the rain continued to fall. At some point, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old photos of Maggie and me. There we were on our wedding day, her face glowing with happiness as she looked at me. There we were at the beach, laughing as the waves crashed around us. There we were in the backyard, covered in paint as we worked on the porch swing I'd built. Every image felt like a knife to the heart, a painful reminder of the life we'd built together. What the hell had happened to us? By the time I left, the diner, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray and heavy. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, love, betrayal. They all swirled together, pulling me in 1,000 different directions. Eventually, I found myself parked in front of the house. Our house. The lights were on inside, a warm glow spilling out onto the lawn, and for a moment, I just sat there, staring at it. I thought about driving away. I thought about leaving for good, starting over somewhere far away where I didn't have to think about Maggie or the mess she'd made of our life. But no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I got out of the truck and walked inside. Maggie was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red and puffy. She looked up when she heard the door open, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "You're back," she said softly. I nodded, closing the door behind me. "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "I'm back." We stood there for a long moment, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. "Finally, Maggie broke it." "I thought I'd lost you," she said, her voice trembling. "You almost did," I replied, my tone flat. Tears filled her eyes and she stood up, taking a tentative step toward me. "Please, we can fix this," she said, her voice pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Just don't give up on us." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to take her in my arms and pretend like none of this had ever happened. But another part of me, the part that still felt raw and broken, wasn't sure if I could. "I need to know one thing," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "Why? Why him? Why any of this?" Maggie hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt invisible, and he made me feel seen. But it didn't mean anything, I swear. It was never about him. It was about me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been expecting anger or denial, but this raw, painful honesty was almost worse. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice cracking. Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said softly, "but I hope you'll try, because I love you, and I don't want to lose you." The room fell silent, and for the first time in weeks I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive her, or if our marriage could survive this. But as I stood there, staring at the woman I'd loved for 20 years. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet.